So, welcome to the bonus episode material, whatever you want to call it, of Red and Black here. Again, I wanted to get into the article that Theodore Johnson wrote in regards to, is this the year for Black Republicans? Now, I'm going to throw this out there. First of all, there's this caveat because if you've been around long enough, you've seen iterations of this article before. I remember when it came out in 2010. Is this the year of Black Republicans? There was a slew of Black Republicans that ran 2 years after President Obama was elected 44th president of the United States. And people were asking that question at the time. Michael Steele was the RNC chair. So there was even more, excitement about that buildup. What I also remember, and this is something that Dr. Metzler actually brought up during the weekly episode of Red and Black, which is there was a reaction within the RNC to Michael Steele, to Black Republicans running, where there were some significant hatchet jobs that happened from Republicans on Republicans, and it was based on race. And, people don't want to talk about that, but, may his soul rest in peace, Dr. Tim Johnson down in North Carolina. I know about some of those instances down there. I know about a prominent Republican politician that was being celebrated at the national level, but had her tree chopped down in North Carolina.
Yep.
Pearl Burris Floyd. I mean, there are other folks that I could sit here and just flip out names. I've thrown out two. I put some receipts on the table. I'm going to keep the rest of them in my pocket for right now. But this was Republican on Republican hit job, purely based on race. And one can make the argument, Jeff, and you've brought this up previously, that just because Kathy Barnett said something about the role of systemic racism in America over the years, that there were some Republicans, conservatives, whatever you want to call them, because some of them are not what they say they are, that took that as an opportunity to chop her tree down to make sure she didn't win the primary in Pennsylvania. Now, whether you were for her or against her, those type of situations in the shadows of an article, is this the year of the Black Republican? To me, I go back to stories of every time we hear an article like that, you see an inner working within certain parts of the conservative movement that tell people not so fast. And I'll even put it out there, even say, know your place.
What's amazing to me about the Kathy Barnett situation is that she wasn't even affirming the left's narrative on systemic racism. They made it look like she was. They lied. They chopped up those videos deceptively, intentionally, to make it look like she was talking about systemic racism and white racism and Black people suffering because of racism and systemic racism. But what's interesting to me was that was the first attack that they used against her, first and second, really. When it wasn't until that failed that they started going to her actual tweets, where she actually did say some stuff that would be controversial about Islam, about members of the LGBTQ community. But it's interesting that they saw a Black woman, so the first attack that they thought of was, let's link her to Black Lives Matter. Let's pretend like she agrees with them. Let's pretend that she agrees with their narrative. To me, it's like, it's very hard for me to see that outside of her race, because if she were white, they wouldn't have done that. They would have gone through her tweets like they would do with a normal candidate. Now, I'm not saying all these people are racist. I'm not making that accusation, but there was a certain perception there that they thought would be the most effective to use.
Hold on. If they do something based on race and they race bait based on race to trigger people to go against her based on race, is that not racist? Don't do that with me, Jeff. I'm calling you because I love you. I just led you to the line where everything they did was based on race, out of racial animus, but you don't want to say what they did was racist. And that seems to be the problem, where this is why Black people don't like Black conservatives, because even when it's obvious, we don't want to say, and that was racist. Because
when I'm talking about racism in this context, I'm talking about treating Black people as if they're inferior. I think that what they did was that they thought that the base was more racist than it actually is. That's what I think happened. Now, do they have racial animus? They might. I would say that them using that as part of her race would be racist and a racist action, but I'm not going to. But I don't know how they personally feel about Black folks or whatever. I'll say that the action itself was racist because you did a specific thing based on her skin color. Yes, especially when there was so much else that you could have used, and yet you went straight to the racial stuff because she's a Black woman. Again, they would not have done that if she was white. So I'll clarify it in that regard. But honestly, I think that they thought that would work on the base because, and they're not the only ones who do this, but I think in general, a lot of these folks think that the white conservative base is more racist than it actually is. So that when they do these things, they think it's going to have more of an impact. And it didn't. So they had to keep going with other attacks.
Dr. Metzler, I would contend that it did. It pulled out her numbers just enough where she's not even in consideration for the recount. It did work.
Yeah, it did work. And look, here's the thing. She would have self-destructed on her own. They didn't need to do it. She would have self-destructed. Her tweets, her inconsistent statements, all of that would have happened on her own. And here's the other thing. It's the whole Willie Horton thing again with her. In addition to which, remember, Black people used to be in significant numbers in the Republican Party. We used to have significant numbers. And so when people are talking about, is this the year of the Black Republican? I ask the question, so we're talking about all these Black Republicans coming to the party, then what? Are we gonna do the same thing that we did last time? I mean, you know, we as a party, part of the conversation isn't really around, okay, so how do we ensure that everyone who is in the big tent is in fact in the tent, not in the tent with their foot outside while they're standing in the tent? And I think for
serving the drinks.
Right. And I think
and proverbially speaking, when I say serving the drinks, I mean serving the established agenda, not contributing to what's on the menu.
Yeah, and you know, for me, I would like for there to be as many Black conservatives as possible, as it was. I'm old enough to remember literally when we were a significant part of the party. But look at the current Republican Party. You know, and there are too many. The party of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah. You know, it's these kinds of things. And I am starting to wonder from a Republican conservative principle these days, what exactly is our message? What are we standing for? Are we just simply saying Democrats are too extreme? Are we still, we know what Democrats are. The question is, who are we? That's the question. I'm not seeing us articulating that enough to sustain the significant amount of Black Republicans we used to have.
Can we have a year of the Black Republican and not answer those questions, Priscilla? And
No,
can you have a year of the Black Republican, not answer those questions, and not be part of the thought leadership within the Republican Party?
No, we can't. And this just exposes the fact that we have way too many Black conservative candidates who have not been in the room at the same amount of time as white conservatives. We have not had the experiences of being elected to municipal positions, to build our bench, to then run for these big offices and be able to compete politically, financially. You have to be able to raise money. You have to have name ID. You have to understand the issues and be able to articulate it. And that takes mentorship. That takes people coming around you that have been in those positions to help you navigate this world of politics. It's very, very tricky. And we talk about this all the time. But yeah, we need to, I call myself a Frederick Douglass Republican. I can articulate what that means for me to be a Republican and the life empowering values of the Constitution. And that's what I stand for. And I love to talk about solutions, and we can look at the data and we can see how the Black community has suffered under Democrat policies. And we're going to be the ones that change that. And we have to get over looking at some of the games the left has played with our community and become educated and become involved and say, you know what, I don't care what has happened. I am going to be part of the solution going forward. And if that means I need to be appointed to a commission or run for school board or be involved in my child's school, as in the PTO, or whatever it is where you start. But that doesn't mean you can't run for your state office. I mean, and represent your house district. There are things that we can start doing as a Black community to get our message out, but we're going to have to be together. We're going to have to be united. We're going to have to do the hard work of fundraising and persuading people that our ideas are better than the left. And that's what it's going to take.
But I guess the question becomes, what's the obligation of the Black Republican versus a regular Republican? You know, that's part of the thing that I brought up in the tweets, going back and forth with Dr. Johnson, which is, you know, Black Republicans, in my opinion, have a completely different historic and contemporary set of obligations than Republicans these days do. And one of the complaints that I have always had about what has been deemed as the grifting Black conservative is that there is no attention paid to that whatsoever. Jackie Robinson was a Republican, as unpopular as it was, and he was holding the party accountable with some of the things that Goldwater said. You've seen other Black Republicans stand up, and then even if you go contemporarily, you've seen Kay Cole James talk about racism in America and how much she loves America and how she went through Jim Crow racism and how she was head of the Heritage Foundation. And she had Tucker Carlson do a 10-minute hit piece at the beginning of his broadcast to try to take her down. That was what, 18 months ago? That wasn't that long ago. So there's always this rub that's going on that Black Republicans, if they're truly 1 foot in the Black community and 1 foot in the conservative community in a genuine sense, that they have to maintain a balance of. And even in this year of 2022, I don't think Herschel Walker's thinking about that. I don't know if John James is thinking about that. I don't know if there are other Black Republican candidates that understand what that is, other than the talking points. If you start telling me about 2-parent households, Jeff, and the role of the church, it's a nice talking point. But that's not the reality of Black people over the last 30 to 40 years, since the war on drugs, mass incarceration, and some of the other things that have been going on.
Well, I mean, and I think that's the quandary that we're in right now. I mean, what I'm seeing as far as politics goes, you're right. I'm not seeing a lot of Black Republicans there who are also not just to promote the Republican Party and to promote conservative values. Yeah, they're doing that part. But when it comes to holding the party accountable for what it should be doing in relation to the Black community, there's not a lot of that. And I think even when I go to the media side where we are, for the past 20, 30 years, they've only wanted one type of Black conservative on their television screens. And that's the one that's going to just promote the Republican Party, promote conservative values, but not really buck up against the Republican Party when it is doing something wrong in this regard, which is interesting because when it comes to the establishment versus America First, you can hold Mitt Romney accountable all day long. I can go on Twitter right now. I've done it before. I can go on Twitter right now and say Mitt Romney sucks. And I won't get anybody saying, oh, you shouldn't attack other Republicans. I will get no pushback at all. But with people like myself, because here's where I'm going with this, in the media, at least on the conservative media, you are seeing more Black people willing to actually say, you know what, when you guys do this messaging, it sucks. Or when you push this type of whatever, you're not doing the right thing. But if I do that, then I get the pushback. I do, but I think that part is changing. But when I look at the political landscape, I'm not seeing much of a change back to, what was his name? Senator Edmund Burke.
Yeah.
We don't have people like that anymore as far as the Black Republican politicians go. He was more, he supported the Republican Party, but he was willing to hold them accountable if they were doing something that he felt was wrong, and not just if they just were too establishment. Like there shouldn't just be one way that is acceptable to criticize Republicans or conservatives. If we're going to grow as a movement and as a party, we need these debates, because if we just continue doing the same thing over and over again, we're not going to go anywhere. And I think we're starting to realize that, because I do see some changes happening. I wish they were happening faster, but they are happening.
Are Black Republicans allowed to even talk about systemic racism in contemporary America? Are Black Republicans? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I guess I want to use that answer and build forward to see what we can create that's going to be better. But are Black Republicans allowed? I put allowed in quotation marks. That's a bad connotation. To bring up the impact of systemic racism on everything from the education system to the political system to the economic system today as an accepted conservative that can then subsequently bring about free market solutions that will allow for the country to be better from a conservative, free market based and influence perspective?
No, because the party line is systemic racism does not exist. So since that is the party line, if you've got Black conservatives who are bringing that up, then they are not conservative in the eyes of many. And here's the reason for that. Because when you talk about systemic racism, it's like when you talk about equity. What folks are saying essentially is, no, that stuff doesn't exist. And I keep telling people, particularly if you think systemic racism, here's what we're talking about: the effect of prior racist practices. For example, redlining still exists. It still exists. That's one example. If you want to talk about equity, and I keep telling people all the time, equity is not about equity of outcome. It is equity of process. To the extent that the playing field is available to everyone, that's what you're doing. You're not saying, if you're doing equity correctly, okay, I'm going to end up with the Black person getting the position or the opportunity. That's not equity. That is not equity. And so those conversations, I think too many people in the conservative movement are essentially taking the left talking points and then determining, if you say equity, if you say systemic racism, if you say any of those things, you're a lefty. No, absolutely not. That's not, we're talking about what actually exists. And, you know, I mean, you guys know me. I mean, I'm old enough. I say whatever the hell I want. I don't really care.
You ain't that old. You ain't that old.
So folks, you know, because folks will say, well, it seems to me that, you know, you have some leftist leanings. Okay, whatever. First of all, understand what you're talking about before you start talking.
But I mean, leftist, I mean, his historic basing stuff on history and facts does not make you a leftist. And second, and it prompts this question in a very indirect way. Let's say the premise of the article is right. Let's say 2022 is the year of the Black Republican, and 70% of the Black Republicans that run because it's supposed to be a Republican year, they win. Let's say we get Senator Herschel Walker in the state of Georgia. Let's say we get, you know, James winning in Michigan and getting a congressional seat, and we still have Burgess Owens in, and we still have Donalds in, and, you know, we still have Scott in, and you start seeing Black Republicans on Capitol Hill. Does that change much for Black America? Do they say now there's, instead of there being two when it was Scott and West in 2011 in the Congress, now there's 5, 6, 7 of us, we can actually do something, and maybe things pivot and change within the party? Or do things stay the same? People forget Allen West. People don't know this fact. Allen West was the second best fundraiser in the House of Representatives the one term he had. And Florida responded to him by gerrymandering him out of his district, and helping to kill his political career in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So do things change, even if it is the year of the Black Republican in 2022, in regards to America's original sin?
I think it only changes if we hold them accountable, if they're elected. If we just sit back and say, okay, we're going to just watch what you do, then we get what we get, and we can't throw a fit. But if they get elected and we say we want to sit down and meet with you and here are our expectations, then that changes the game. Then we become more vocal and involved and influential in the why behind we're electing certain candidates to be in office. Now, for us, it's not all about race. Like, we're conservative, so we want to see economic prosperity. We want to see our children thriving with their education. We want a future just like any other American. But that's going to take hard conversations because we are operating from a deficit. We are coming from a history of not being equal. And so we're going to have to play catch up. And what does that look like? We're going to have to be really, really specific on what kind of legislation that looks like, because that's what they're there for. They're there for legislation. And if we're about smaller government and more independence, that's going to look a certain way. So we have to be really, really clear.
Jeff, what's a true year of the Black Republican look like? If I gave you the choice of 2 Black Republicans that fought like Frederick Douglass, or 10 Black Republicans that will be a spectrum across modern day conservatism, mostly leaning towards what the Republican Party looks like now, what's the better year of the Black Republican from your perspective? Because there's an argument to be made that political diversity is better because it makes you more mainstream. There's an argument to be made that you need some firebrands, you need some radical Republicans in this Republican Party that are radical in a more 1860s type of way versus a 2020 type of way.
I would say, I mean, first off, I mean, year of the Republican. I mean, like you said, we've heard that before. I'll believe it when I see it. I'd rather see a decade of the Black Republican, honestly, because it's going to take that level of sustained effort to make an actual difference. If I had to choose between the two, I'm going to choose a political diversity. I would rather have those 10 people, with some maybe just towing the Republican Party line, but that would also include what you just described, the radical Republicans of the 60s and everywhere in between. My biggest problem, my biggest gripe with the way the conservative movement has treated Black conservatives, or at least the ones that they push, is that they only pushed one type. That's it. You didn't hear any other type of Black conservative voices over the past 20, 30 years.
Can I ask this question? Can I ask this question that is very charged?
Yeah. The more charged, the better.
Are these Black conservatives Black conservatives, or are they merely dark conservatives? Because being a dark conservative, it just means your skin color is darker, but everything else is the same, versus the social connotation of what it means to be Black. Now, I'm not accusing them of being one or the other. I'm asking a provocative question. Are the conservatives that are being pushed that are African American descent, are they more Black conservatives, or are they just dark-skinned conservatives?
I believe that who the establishment has pushed have been dark conservatives. Now, I'm not even saying that they even wanted to be that. Because I hear a lot of these people say later on that they wanted to be able to say certain things, but they were discouraged from doing so. They were given a script, and that's the script that you were supposed to recite. Now, they'd have still done it? No, probably not. But I'm not litigating that right now. I'm just saying that what the establishment wanted to push were dark conservatives that didn't really have any type of tie or connection to the Black community. But I think that has been what they have pushed, and that's always been my gripe. My gripe is I don't want to take away voices. I want to add more on. So it wasn't so much that they pushed these people, is that they were the only ones that they pushed. Now that there's alternative media, and we have sites like Red State that will allow for a wider variety of Black conservative voices, now the base is starting to see, Black conservatives aren't a monolith. They're not all the same. And I think that's a good thing. So if I had to choose between the scenario that you gave me, I would go with 10 Black conservative voices that run the gamut, because that way people can pick and choose what they want instead of only being fed one thing.
Dr. Metz, I'm going to ask you the same question than you, Priscilla, and I am using specifically Black conservative versus dark conservative because there is a double entendre with dark conservative, because there are those that will say that because you have dark conservatives, quote unquote, that are not acting like Black conservatives, that those dark conservatives are helping the conservative movement take things off the rails that are impacting the Black community subsequent to that. So I know the difference between dark-skinned and dark, but I specifically pick the word dark as a double entendre, but what say you?
Yeah, it is, and that's always been my complaint about the party, and not being able to attract both candidates and Black voters in a significant number. It is, in fact, because of the dark conservative push. It is also, in fact, as to what Jeff is saying. Listen, all Black conservatives are not going to have the same opinion, nor should they. That's not the point. We're supposed to be the party of free thinkers. We're supposed to be the party that susses it all out after we've had robust debate. But that is not where we're going. Essentially, what we're saying, here are the talking points, go away. Don't say anything, don't be creative, toe the party line. Well, conservative principles, there is not a party line. There are significant differences within conservative thought. And in fact, the fundamental thing, and the Republican Party really still does not get it, which is Black people by nature are very conservative people. Since that is the case, why do we not have more Black people in the conservative movement? It is largely because too many of us don't accept contrasting points of view, number one. And it's to a point that Jeff made earlier, in which the establishment believes that the conservative base is much more racist than it actually is. There is that aspect of it. And finally, there is this notion that, yeah, well, you don't vote for us anyway, so why are we wasting money trying to court you? If that's going to be the position that the party takes, the party is going to die on the vine. Simply look at the demographics. Simply look at the changing demographics. So keep it up, and then the Democrats will control. But again, that has to be a decision that the party makes. This conversation we're having does not happen in the power rooms when there are discussions about elections and any of those kinds of things. The conversation is around the dark conservative who will toe the party line. And that's the reality.
Priscilla?
Wow, to add to my Nubian brothers here, we're talking about the hue and all of this. When I hear like, what does it mean to be Black? A lot of people can't describe that because, to Dr. Metzer's point, we are not a monolith. Or was that you, Jeff? Someone said it. We're not a monolith.
Was it something that was brilliant?
Then Jeff said it.
If it was something that was brilliant.
From a party standpoint, and this is why I ran, because I was just so sick and tired of this rhetoric that Republicans are just one type of demographic. We are wide range, and I want to bring in like Hispanics and Asians and Muslims who are conservative. We are extremely diverse, and our party has to do more to pay attention, because the Democrats are kicking our butt when it comes to engaging in the community and listening and hearing and being a part of the solution, and just admitting, we're the United States, we're diverse. We have immigrants from all over the world who have come here to build a better life. And what are we doing to ensure that they have a better life? So we have to do a better job of engaging more people in the conversation, in the room, putting our time and our money behind candidates that are trying to be a part of the change in a positive way, and not creating a narrative around us that the left has created about us as Black people, because the left is dictating to the Republican Party who we are as Black conservatives. We don't need them to tell us who we are. We need an opportunity to be in the room and be treated with the same level of respect as any other candidate.
Are they dictating what a Black conservative is, or is the powers that be within the conservative movement dictating what a Black conservative can be? Because There's the argument that both, yes, there's the argument that the answer is C, all of the above, because the liberals want the Uncle Tom caricature, and the right doesn't want to have the status quo bucked up against, right? So when you combine those two, you either have somebody that's willing to go along to get along in order to win, or you got somebody that has some really hard decisions to make. Because when you start talking, it kind of goes into this next question. You start talking about the year of the Black Republican. Is it the year of the Black Republican because more Black Republicans have figured out the cheat code to make conservatives like them and give them money? Or is it the year of the Black Republican because America is more accepting of Black Republicans? Because it can be the year of the Black Republican because a lot of Black Republicans got through the primary and they're more accepted by the conservative movement. But that does not mean that Black America is becoming more politically diverse, or that they're gonna benefit from that Black Republican getting more political power, because those are two radically different things. Acceptance within a silo is not the same as being accepted as a national leader.
Well, I think we've been doing a better job as Black conservatives encouraging people to get involved and not just sitting back and allowing votes to be made on our behalf. I'm in a lot of chat rooms.
Hold on, because I see the path you're going down. I'm going to redirect you to the question, because being more involved in just following the script and getting more access because you're following the script is not the same as being truly empowered and saying, I believe in 80% of the script, but I'm going to flip the script 20% of the time because I am a Black conservative.
No, what I'm seeing and hearing are people encouraging civic engagement and not saying you have to have a script. These are Black on Black conversations in these chat rooms where people are waking up and seeing what's happening and what has happened in our country and saying, guys, we have to run for office if we want to see legislation change. That's what
Is that specific to the Republican Party, Dr. Metzler? Because I could make the argument that started sparking up in 2008 when a dude with a Muslim name from the south side of Chicago had the audacity to run against a former first lady who was a U.S. senator and a former vice presidential candidate and a U.S. senator and a former UN ambassador. People forget what that 2008 primary field looked like that Barack Obama worked his way through. That could have sparked it. 2 years of a Black president could have sparked Black engagement. I am very specific to Black Republican engagement and what that looks like. Is it more of, hey, we're getting through the primary because we know what to say now? Or is it, we're going to change America because we're Black Republicans and we're going to impact all of this, and that's what's going on?
Well, I'm not sure that the conversation, first of all, as Black conservatives, I'm not sure, and particularly folks running for office, how much we are engaged with each other on bringing any kind of a conservative policy or agenda forward. I think that a number of Black conservatives who are running for office, one, don't even know the others who are running for office. Two, have not even had a conversation with them running for office.
Why,
and so,
why not? Why not?
Because it goes back to the notion that I have to be careful as not being seen as, organizing an overthrow, if you will. I think it's still too new for that to happen. And so there is a long way to go relative to sparking this movement. But if we're going to spark the movement, we do what other folks in the Conservative Party does. We become strategically aligned with our partners who are running for office. We don't do that in any kind of an organized way.
Jeff, what say you? I mean, that makes sense to me, because if, I hate to say this too, and this might be provocative, but if you're trying to be the one You know, people don't, I tell people all the time, I've taken my HNIC inoculation shots so that I don't get
Yes.
infected by the disease. But there are
Right.
some people that come down with that illness. And when you come down with that illness, it's very hard to be around other folks without either making them contagious to that illness, which makes it worse, or just not wanting to be around them at all. How do you beat that? How do you say, you know, we can have 5 brilliant African-American Republicans in the room, and even though there might be only one microphone, I don't need to get in front of the microphone today?
It's tough. I mean, especially with the gatekeeping problem that we've always had on the right.
And hold on, before you continue, those of you that are in the chat room saying HNIC, what the heck is that?
Yeah, I was like, nobody's going to know what that means, bro.
Somebody does. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, it's the head something in charge.
In charge.
I'll let you use your imagination as to what the N is, okay? But yeah, I mean, there is an aspect of that. I mean, and that is something that I've heard about for a long time. I mean, a lot of, and I'm not going to name names, but there are certain Black conservatives throughout the years and even now who want to be the Black conservative voice, where they want to be seen as the Black conservative authority, rather than it being, hey, this is a group of us. I mean, even if you even go outside of Black republicanism, I mean, even among the Republican Party, you have multiple voices. Yeah, Trump might be the number one influencer, but you got DeSantis, you got Ted Cruz, you got the people who we don't like, you got the McConnells, Liz Cheney. But within the circle of Black conservatives, I think there's this need to want to be the rarity or the unique individual, and there are far fewer of us on the right than there are on the left. I mean, if you're a Black Democrat, you probably have to work harder to become more prominent. On the right, it's not as big of a deal.
And so,
but should that even be the focus? No, it shouldn't.
Well, it is, Jeff. And I'm again back to putting some provocative stuff out there. When it's a competition to be the dark conservative, there's a competition. If you're trying to be a Black conservative, you understand that fighting for the rights of Black people and all people in America has always been a collective dynamic over the course of many decades. The competition subsides. But if you're focusing on dark versus Black, then it's almost as if you're winning a trophy.
Well, and it's funny that you even mentioned that too, because among those of us who do want to use conservative solutions to address the issues that have placed too many Black people behind whites in America, you don't see a lot of that competition. Like when we talk to each other, we're not trying to necessarily get the spotlight, but among the ones who just want the fame and the fortune and want to say what people want to hear, there is that competition. The issue, at least up until now, has been that this group that wants to see actual change in policy, that and free markets helping the Black community close those disparities, are they kind of get lumped in with the dark conservatives. And since they want the spotlight, a lot of those, that's why we had that big clash.
Did you say they want the dark light? Is that what you said?
What?
Did you say they want the dark light, not the spotlight? Is that what you're saying?
No, but I wish I had said that. Now that
or were you making a double entendre on the slur spot? Because that's not cool either.
Well, but
no, I'm just saying that that's why we had that conflict.
Yeah, I missed that one, Dr. Metzler.
Sorry. Yeah. I know. I'm pretty sure everybody missed that one. Anyway, but that's why that clash existed, because you had this other group of people who are getting more recognized on social media. They're in more of the alternative media because you don't have to be on Fox News now to get to people. So I think that's why there was that big clash, because these types wanted to be the ones who spoke for Black conservatism, and you had this other upstart group come up, and that caused some friction. So I do think that the gatekeeping issue, it still remains, but I think we're going to see less of it as long as the people, the folks like us, continue to get out there and speak our minds. And again, it's all about giving people a choice. I want to give the conservative base a choice. No, don't just push one type of voice. Let's have them all, and you choose which one you want to go with.
Yeah, and I would commend two things to for people. Number one, if you haven't read The Spook Who Sat by the Door, I certainly suggest you read that, and that would put a lot of context into what we're talking about. The second thing is, I would also commend the movie Harriet as well. And so I think for our listeners, for our viewers, for our subscribers, I think those two nuggets will give you a lot more context in terms of what we're talking about.
So I guess, and I know we need to wrap up soon, but the thing that struck me about what you said, Jeff, and Priscilla, I'm gonna bounce it off you first, is the people that are, quote, thought leaders on social media, particularly for, I'll put in quotation marks, Black conservatism. What have they ever put on the line other than a bunch of social media tweets and some comments on YouTube and some comments on television? You know, have they put a policy proposal together? Have they served on a panel? Have they served on a committee? Have they run for office? Have they served in public policy? Because commentary is good. You can push things through media commentary and make a difference. I get that. We've seen people do it on both sides of the aisle. But isn't there a different obligation for people of African descent based on the civil rights history that we have uniquely had to go through to do more than just that? And people could say, well, Asians don't have to do it and Latinos don't have to do it. They weren't enslaved. They didn't have 100 years of Jim Crow against them. They, even if you want to, and I'm not trying to bite on anybody that is in an interracial marriage, obviously, look, I have white people in my family. I love everybody. But Latinos were able to intermarry with a lot less issues and integrate in some instances than others were in this country, particularly Black people, and particularly Black people that are descendants of slaves. Mm-hmm. So when you take all that into consideration, isn't there a bigger obligation for Black conservatives to be thought leaders more than just a tweet that's going to get retweeted 5,000 times and have 1 million followers and look cute on Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, that's the day and age we're living in. People are chasing the likes and the followers, and we're more intelligent than that. And I'm hungry for that. When I go on my social media, I'm looking for people that are bringing me solutions and that are moving the needle. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a perpetual student council election race to see who's going to be the most popular on social media. But we need action. And that's why we have this show, is because all of us are doing more than just talking about the issues. We are also movers and shakers in our ecosystems, and they're widening, and we're getting more and more people engaging in the conversation, saying, hey, you know what, you're right. If I engage with a candidate, I'm going to expect action. I'm going to hold them accountable. If you want my vote, you're going to earn my vote. We are no longer giving our votes away to people who are not going to do anything for Americans. And yes, that means addressing the tough issue of our history in America. We are conservatives, we are Republicans. We're about smaller government, but we still have a history. I am a descendant of enslaved Africans, and that means something to me. And I am working really hard to not have that be an issue. It's going to maybe, I don't know if it's going to be in our generation where we can see that happening, because the left loves to keep us divided and remind us of that we're less than and we can't achieve, and they can't look at us as being equal to anybody else. And so fighting that is an everyday issue. And so to the whole point of this conversation, the RNC needs to understand that this conversation needs to be ongoing. It needs to be specific. They need to listen to Black Republicans when we talk about what is it, when we say systemic racism, what does that mean? What does it look like? And yeah, there are solutions. We just need to get behind those solutions.
What, you know, ironically, Jeff, one of the solutions that came under Republican administration was affirmative action that Republicans have been attacking for quite some time through the courts and through policies. People forget the role of the Republican Party in the 1800s, in the 1900s, when it's come to civil rights and voting rights and things along those lines. And yet we have seen a certain push for rolling back of those rights as if systemic racism is gone, or that the impact of that should not be focused on as much. What do we do as, and I'm going to use the Black conservative double entendre in the positive light, what do we do as those Black oriented conservatives that understand the unique position that we're in? What are the types of things we can do from a policy standpoint that would seem to be pure from a conservative thought leadership perspective, if there's such thing as pure, but also very mindful of the unique history that Black people have gone through contemporarily and on back through the 1900s and 1800s.
Well, you asked the question earlier, if Black conservatives can talk about systemic racism or if we're allowed to. And the answer is correct. I mean, it's very hard to talk about that issue because we've been so conditioned to believe that it's what the left means it is. Like, I believe in systemic racism. I do not believe in it to the extent that the progressives do or the things that they say. And where areas where I've gotten the least amount of pushback is if I talk about systemic racism, but I'm not using it to cast Republicans in a negative light. Because if you think about it, most of it has been done by the Democrats. And they do know the history because they can repeat it every time they're called racist. No, the Republicans freed the slaves. They did civil rights and blah, 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 blah. They know that history. And they don't know about the negative parts of the Republican Party's history, but that's a whole different thing. But I think when I talk about it in terms of, and I hate that I even have to do this, but if I put it through a partisan lens, they're a lot more receptive. If I talk about the things that the Democrats that have done and are doing today that have been systemically racist or had those outcomes, they're a lot more receptive. Because the reality is that today, I think the Republican Party does contribute to it, but most of these cities, most of these places are run by the left, by the Democrats. So there's no discounting that. So when I talk about it in those terms, people are a lot more receptive. As far as policy goes, a lot of the things that the Democrats have done have involved policy. So if we're talking about implementing policy that is designed to close those educational and wealth gaps, a lot of that would be rolling back a lot of what the Democrats have done, getting the government out of the way. These are conservative principles. This is what we say we like. So you get the government out of the way, you protect people's rights, you ensure that people have choice when it comes to education so that Black people can have better education. I think that's where a lot of it starts. We already have a lot of the policy. We already have a lot of the ideas. We just don't really, I don't think we really sell them effectively. I don't think that we address these as ways to close racial disparities because we like to pretend like we don't like identity politics, even though we really do. I think a lot of it has to do with the messaging and the way we think about these things. There are policies that we already promote that would help to close those racial disparities. It's okay to say that. It's okay to say, you know what, throughout history, the government has done this to Black people, and it is one of the biggest contributors to where a lot of Black people find themselves right now. Here are the policies that we already recommend that would help to close those disparities and address the wrongs that have been done. If you want to address racial inequity, you don't have to do that by being a progressive. There are conservative solutions to that problem. And I think that we need to recognize it, stop pretending like we don't see color or that we don't see race or ethnicity, and address it that way. It's okay to do that.
Dr. Metzler, we're about to wrap up, but as Jeff Charles's campaign manager for his 2024 congressional run, based on what you just heard from him, what types of things would you ask for him to promote when he's on the campaign trail? Now, I'm being facetious because I'm kind of pushing Jeff into a race 2 years from now. But the real question,
I haven't lost my mind yet. I'm not running for office.
But hold on, because now I am going to bring up a real question, which is, one, there's something that Black Republicans that are candidates have to speak differently that keep both feet in both camps. And number two, why can't we have more of a Jeff Charles run and win? Because what he's saying seems to sound both Black and conservative.
Well, yeah, it is both Black and conservative, and it's also realistic. From the standpoint of what we need to do as conservatives, the free market principles, the education principles, if we want to deal with systemic racism, here's what we do. We look at those policies that have been implemented, whether it is banking, whether it is lead pipes, whether it is any of those things. We look at those things and find solutions to them. God knows in those cities, they get all of this money to do it, and it is still deteriorated. Look at Baltimore City. Baltimore City is an unmitigated disaster and has been run by Democrats forever.
We had a bridge collapse. We win.
Yeah. Well, then you have the state's attorney who's under indictment. I mean, so these are the kinds of things. Education, absolutely. But I think we have to take a very different look at education. It's about school choice. It's about all of those kinds of things. It is also about this notion that we want to force everybody to go to college. Everybody does not need to go to college. When we talk about education, you have all these people going to culinary school, coming out with $175,000 in student loans. You want to then forgive those, and at best they've gone to culinary school. Where are they gonna work? They're not gonna make significant money to be able to pay that back. So I think we have the solutions. But to Jeff's point, we don't talk about it that way because we don't want to be accused of being a rhino or a leftist. Until we stop doing that, we're going to find ourselves in the perpetual quandary.
Priscilla, you get the last word. You got a minute, then we got to jump out of here. Last word for the lady.
Absolutely. I agree with everybody. You know, that's why we're all together. And this is where it starts. We have to talk about the issues in a way that resonates with the audience that we're in. But this whole thing about the Republican Party not looking at us as conservatives because we're talking about these demographic issues and racial issues, that needs to end. And that starts right here, right now. If we have any chance of winning in November, we need to talk about these issues that the public is talking about.
So it seems as though the year of the Black Republican needs to be a lot more than just winning elections in November in 2022. It's really about winning the future for more united America from a racial standpoint, and then from a geopolitical and geoeconomic perspective as well, where more Americans that have been on the periphery are finally included in the American dream. Folks, I appreciate the three of you all having this conversation and talking through some of this. Those of you that have been in the chat room and listening in on this special kind of conversation here on Red and Black, a little bit of bonus conversation, bonus coverage. We appreciate you joining us as well. Like, subscribe, share on the Red State channel for Red and Black. Every week we are moving from Saturday to Monday. We will be airing our premiere of Red and Black every Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which will allow you all on the West Coast to wake up with a cup of coffee and check us out. Those of you that are going on to your lunch breaks, Monday morning gives you a chance to watch us, you know, as a nice little break from the workday. In the meanwhile, again, you know, we love you. We're trying to get to solutions. We're trying to get to unification in the best way possible and get us through some of these, and here goes this double entendre again, dark times. In the meanwhile, take care of yourselves. TCNGB, take care and God bless. Peace.